A very good morning indeed to you. It's one of those days where I think it possibly depends how sort of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed I'm feeling. This, I hope, doesn't come as a major shock to you, but there are some mornings where I perhaps fall victim to a form of laziness. And I think to myself, I know we did it yesterday, but let's do it again today because the phones will go bonkers and I can sit back, put my feet up and just sort of take pot shots at people calling in. And today is one of those days because the likelihood of Ollie Robinson, the England cricketer, being suspended for more than the next test remains negligible. If I was part of the high command of English and Welsh cricket, I'd be absolutely staggered that the Prime Minister has intervened and the Secretary of State for Flags and Culture. Here's a prediction, and if I get it wrong, I get it wrong. The inquiry will conclude that he behaved appallingly and that the suspension he's already served was a fitting punishment. And then we can all go back to the things that really matter. And there, of course, is the reason why the Prime Minister has intervened. Because the things that really matter are, at the moment, and for the foreseeable future, the things that the Prime Minister and indeed the Secretary of State for Culture and Flags is absolutely desperate that you don't talk about or look at. So if I was feeling a bit lazier, I wouldn't talk about the report into burnout in the NHS reaching critical levels. I'd talk about cricket. If I was feeling a little bit lazy today, I wouldn't talk to you about the huge shortage of hauliers, drivers that is likely to see a rise in food prices. Because, of course, you've got a government that told you if you voted for Brexit, then your food prices would come down. I probably would, however lazy I was feeling, talk to you about ministers being split over this potential extension to lockdown, because I find it, it's a life and death issue, although thankfully the statistics have seen the likelihood of death diminish enormously, the successful vaccination, the brilliant vaccination rollout. Again, though, just to sort of remind you of previous predictions, the gap between us and other European countries is now narrowing rapidly. So, as we said, probably by the end of summer, certainly by the autumn, spring, summer, autumn, by the autumn, you'd be looking at a relatively level playing field. But no one can ever take away the fact that we got out of the blocks first and fastest. That's huge. That's a big story. David Frost. Even I'm surprised it's only taken 6 months. I honestly thought it would take a little bit longer than that for the Brexit minister, to tell you that the reason why the deal that he told you to celebrate on Christmas Eve is rubbish. That they of course negotiated, signed it, ratified it and signed it, and now they're trying to blame it on the European Union. If you've got a trophy, if you've got something worth celebrating, if you've got a win, if you've got a victory in your pocket, you never need to blame it on anybody else. It can't be somebody else's fault that you've got this wonderful win in your back pocket. What have you got? How are you doing? Yay, we're winning. Oh, great. Yeah, it's all their fault. It's all their fault we won. This treaty we signed that we apparently didn't read. So you've now got this, and if you're a regular listener to this programme, then you probably, like me, will be torn between fury and amusement now, a sort of wry, eye-rolling amusement. They've been taken by surprise by the fact that it's made trading between Great Britain and Northern Ireland difficult. They've been really surprised by that, which I suppose is a possible position to have adopted if you were living in a fridge for the whole of 2020. But if you were actually negotiating the treaty or part of a government that told the British public it was oven ready and worthy of the highest salutations and celebrations, you could be forgiven for wondering whether or not you've woken up in the upside down. Hang on a minute. So all the people that warned about what was going to happen in Northern Ireland are completely right. And all the politicians who called it Project Fear and were very, very rude to some of the fine, upstanding members of the media who explained what was going to happen in Northern Ireland, they've been proved completely right. All the politicians have been proved completely wrong. But the politicians who said that there weren't going to be any problems and insulted all of the experts that said there were going to be problems, those politicians have been taken by surprise by the problems. I don't know if we'll get onto that at 12. If you've been listening for much of this year, you'll know I don't know whether it's because of the virus or because of something subtler. I find it hard to get back into Brexit-related conversations, not just because of the financial cost accrued every time I find myself accidentally saying the words "I told you so" on the radio. That's £10 in the tin, which Keith is already rattling. But that can't be the only reason I find it so difficult to get back into these conversations. So I think we'll start with stories, lived experiences. I think it's very hard not to see the politics in everything at the moment. Anybody who tells you that there is no politics in Situation X means usually that the politicians they support are responsible for Situation X, and therefore we should all pretend that politics and politics has nothing to do with Situation X. But staff burnout in the NHS, one of the most amazing things about this current government, and I almost mean this as a compliment, is the way they've successfully unhitched themselves from the previous 11 years of Conservative rule, despite the fact that many members of the Cabinet were in previous cabinets. You go right back to David Cameron. But I told you this was going to happen. That's not an I told you so. I don't think it took any particular skills to see it happening, because it's Johnson's gift. It always has been Johnson's gift. And as someone who fell for his shtick 13 years ago in London, I am qualified to comment on the shtick, because I can now see through it, which means I'm not really allowed to insult people who still can't. So I do this for a living. But he's got this astonishing ability to rise above or sink below the waterline. He detaches, he unhitches himself, he disconnects himself from what's gone on. So no matter he was Foreign Secretary under the last government until resigning for completely spurious reasons under the last Prime Minister, no matter what went on under her has nothing to do with him. So the cuts to the NHS, these bogus promises to build new hospitals, well, I say bogus. You might think that promising to build a new hospital completely means knocking down an old one and putting a new one up in its place. I always thought it meant if you've got 10 and you're building 40 new ones, you'll end up with 50, not 40, or indeed 10. But hey-ho, I'm old-fashioned like that. Apparently it's open to debate. So they're responsible for all of these cuts. Brexit is responsible for epic labour shortages in all sorts of sectors, most obviously and urgently in the trade press at the moment. That would be haulage and hospitality and catering. But the NHS was facing huge shortages before the virus happened. And there's a very important report today from the Commons Select Committee that monitors the Department of Health and Social Care. And I wanted to get the politics out of the way early, because I don't want to focus upon it for the rest of this hour. I want instead to focus upon the people we used to clap for every Thursday night. It's odd how the concept of clapping, that phenomenon, which I thought was really beautiful at the time, I'm not going to lie to you, as you probably know by now, I have a tendency to be a bit of a soppy git at times. I just really liked it. It wasn't an either-or on a pay rise for most of us. It wasn't as if by clapping we were endorsing the idea that they don't deserve a decent pay rise. And by decent, I just mean, a tiny, tiny fraction of what Boris Johnson spent somebody else's money on when his current partner was doing up his flat. I don't mean an epic sum of money. I mean, maybe a couple of rolls of Lulu Little wallpaper a year kind of pay rise. But it was never either or, was it? And we used to do it, and the children got involved. Yours did too. And it was really, really nice. It was also strangely unifying at a time of great fear and pain. The unknown unknowns were truly terrifying for most of 2020. And on Thursday nights, we got a chance to show our appreciation for and to. That was the lovely bit about it, the directness of it, because there were people who were working, people who lived on your street were working for the NHS. You had doctors, you had nurses, paramedics. But the people we were clapping for lived alongside us, and sometimes they'd be in. Saw wonderful pictures of people coming home from a tough shift in the hospital to find their neighbours on the doorsteps praising them to the rafters. It was really, really lovely. Genuinely lovely. And I think it's a shame when people, here we go. Ziggy, it's not an empty gesture. It wasn't an empty gesture. It might have been when you did it, mate, but it wasn't an empty gesture when I did it. I can't tell you whether or not you were empty if you did it. I can only ask you. And I did not do it as an empty gesture. I believed that it really meant a lot to doctors and nurses. It was one of the only ways those of us who weren't hospitalised or visiting hospitals when we were allowed to, it was one of the only ways we could articulate our epic admiration and gratitude for people who do this for a living. Okay? And then it tailed off a bit. And then it ran out of steam, inevitably, and then it was officially curtailed, correctly. And then the pay rise story came along, and I guess if you lean towards this current regime, you have to sort of hold your nose, close your eyes, stick your fingers in your ears and pretend you haven't really noticed that, because you can't publicly start arguing that a round of applause on a Thursday night puts food on the table or electricity in the meter or petrol in your car. You just can't. And that's, that's what they've reduced you to. You have to just shut up and stop talking about doctors and nurses. Otherwise, you'd have to accept that for some bizarre reason, we've ended up with a government that thinks they can be paid in claps. And of course, if you're part of that, then it's a very difficult truth to acknowledge. So where's it led? Burnout is the word that's used in this committee report, prompting some staff to quit. Some reports of medical blunders caused by fatigue and understaffing. Patient safety put at risk. Exacerbated by the pandemic, but not necessarily caused, but so widespread across health and social care that both key public services are in danger of no longer working properly. So I get, and I think I'm going to fail completely to get the politics out of this conversation, so scratch that pledge. I've already broken it. I'm only human, after all. That's incredible, right? I get a little bit frustrated when you are successfully persuaded not to care about corruption or cronyism or having a prime minister that apparently neither knows nor cares where the money has come from to pay for his own home to be refurbished at a time when millions of people in this country are facing possible eviction from their homes. So I find it frustrating, but I don't hate the victims of it. Compassion for the contempt for the con men. So when people say to you, it's just wallpaper, that's not your fault you end up believing it, any more than it's your fault you end up believing that Harry Kane is a Marxist and that Marcus Rashford wants to defund the police. But that was yesterday's show. So I get a little bit frustrated by the success of the right-wing media in persuading people not to care about things that simply do matter. Successful manipulation leads to events like the ones we saw in America on January the 6th. But you have to care about this. I don't know how you do avoid caring about this. The NHS is on its knees, according to a report by a committee of all-party MPs. And part of the reason is overload. I almost struggle to find the right words, and I've got quite a good vocabulary. Overburdened, overloaded, underfunded, understaffed. And today, because a round of applause feels very, very, very pathetic in the context of what we're learning and reading today. Today, this microphone is yours. Just tell us what's going on. Doctors, nurses, other healthcare professionals, social care as well as healthcare. How bad is it? How bad is it? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Have you packed it in? Have you moved departments? Are you on sick leave at the moment? And what sort of impact is it having on us? Because there's always a slight temptation on mornings like this not to talk about it. I always remember doing something about problems in the NHS, and a lovely lady got in touch who was due to go into hospital that afternoon, and she'd got scared by what she heard. And the temptation there is to prioritise her feelings and not report the reality of what's going on in hospitals. But I think together we can walk that tightrope, can't we? We can trust each other on this one? Yeah, I hope so. We'll soon find out. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. Burnout among NHS staff is reaching really scary levels. Could you tell us from the inside what that's like? The number you need is 0345 6060 973. And I may not be able to promise you a round of applause, but I can certainly promise you a sympathetic ear and a very warm welcome. It's 21 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Burnout among NHS staff is prompting some to quit, causing medical blunders and putting patients' safety at risk, a committee of MPs has said. Committees are the one place where footballification is at its weakest in British politics at the moment, because although there is politicking and agitating with regard to who chairs them and the makeup of them, they are committees of all MPs. So you can't just wave your scarf at this one and pretend it's not happening. the finding is that workforce burnout across the NHS and care systems now presents, and I quote, an extraordinarily dangerous risk to the proper functioning of both services. Yes, the fact that the chair of the committee, Jeremy Hunt, presided over a filleting of the NHS for many of the last 11 years is somewhat challenging to those of us who seek to keep an even keel, but there it is. Staff face unacceptable pressure, with chronic excessive workload identified as a key driver of workforce burnout. What's it like on the inside? 0345 6060 973. Peter's in Newcastle. Peter, what can you tell us?
Hey, no, just wanted to speak about real lived experiences, really. My wife actually works as a anaesthetist in a hospital up here, and it's tremendously difficult, to be honest. There's lots of tears, lots of anxiety and stress and worry with regards to working situations at the moment. Obviously, due to what's happened with respect to Brexit, we've seen a mass exodus of fantastic staff from the likes of the Philippines just disappear.
I have to remind you that the status of Filipino nurses here has nothing to do with European Union membership.
No. But with regards to the feeling of being welcomed,
okay.
A lot of people are leaving because they're disheartened by the service. They're disheartened by the stress and anxiety they're being pushed under by the expectations of just look at what's happening with GP practices at the moment, and the messages that are kind of conflicting with respect to how people should kind of go to speak to GPs, etc., and not. And it's very confusing. And at the heart of it, I think where we as a country are going to move towards and hopefully come out of this madness is it'll lie on the foundations of the likes of empathy, hope and opportunities. I do think that, we have some wonderful people in this country doing some tremendous work. And when we were all standing outside on our doorsteps clapping for carers, we have to remember that. And
it's odd, isn't it? How do you translate that? I think very real and quite. I mean, obviously, some of the people standing on their doorsteps clapping will, in the next breath, be attacking doctors and nurses for having the audacity to complain about their political leadership. But how do you translate that into support for where they are now? I mean, because it seems odd, doesn't it, that we can have a nationwide moment like that, repeat it weekly, and then on a day like today, I know how hard it is to get people to care about people like your wife, and I don't understand why, Peter.
I think it just comes into affecting and discussing the issues at hand with your own community and your fellow neighbours, and moving it on from almost like a community,
It's trying to turn it into us, isn't it, rather than them and us, as with so much of British politics. If we could just remember that we're actually us rather than them and us, then we might make progress. It's a funny one, though.
There's a great article, journal that's just been released it's called the Alderman Report 2021, and that goes on about the loss of trust within government and throughout the world, and based upon their decision making, etc. And how ultimately society and community are going to change overall. And it's going to be driven by the foundations, by the likes of us talking about, me sat out in a car park when our son was being born, not able to go into a hospital, and then worrying about my wife, about what it was really going to be like and how is she. These messages, these actual lived experiences are what actually takes us away from what. That is.
And of course, we could, instead of discussing this lived experience, as you call it, that could not be of more relevance or importance to every single person living on these islands, we could currently, and we did yesterday, be having a conversation about an 8-year-old tweet sent by a teenage cricketer. And you can see why Boris Johnson would prefer to comment on that, can't you, as opposed to what we're talking about today. But hey-ho, tug forelock, doff cap. 26 after 10. Anne's in Wiltshire. Anne, what would you like to say?
I was a district nurse, I still am, worked in the pandemic. I was pregnant during the last lockdown, I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
It all blends into one. And I had my baby at 32 weeks, and they think it's because of stress. And I'm not sure if I really want to go back.
Why not?
It's so stressful. There's so much more death. I work in the community, and there's so much more death. And it just dealing with it every day. And some people clap and some people say we're heroes, which I don't think we are.
I do, but I know you do. This is the problem, Anne, is that people like you don't need a pat on the back every 10 minutes, do you? I mean, that's why you're not in media. That's why you're not doing what I do for a living. You don't need a flipping round of applause or a lap of honour or anything like that. And you certainly don't want to spend your life banging on about how wonderful you are.
No, I need to pay my bills.
Yeah, I hear you.
And it doesn't pay the bills. And I love my job, and I leave some people sometimes. And when I see, especially end of life people, I leave and I think, if there was someone else doing this, maybe they wouldn't be able to connect as well as I do with these people. It'd be different. That person's experience of death would be different. But at the same time, I've got a son now, and I need to worry about paying my rent and paying my bills.
So where is? So you're not paid enough, you feel, to have a decent standard of living, or am I putting words into your mouth?
Yeah. I'm in the southeast. I'm in Wiltshire, so my cost of living's quite high. And I probably, it's not. I don't want lots of money.
No.
But I could quit my job and probably go work in Aldi and get paid pretty similar.
It's that bad, is it? Nothing wrong with working in Aldi, but I think most of us would blithely presume that district nurses get paid more than supermarket workers. Not to make any sweeping value judgments about either career choice. And what about? I mean, how much of it? And this is one of the hardest questions I ever ask people like you. And I sometimes get the words a bit wrong, so I'll ask your forgiveness in advance. How much of it is because, apart from consultants who often have a reputation for arrogance bordering upon pathology, most people in the NHS don't make a fuss. You didn't go into it for riches and fame, or you went into it often for the most altruistic and beautiful of reasons, and that just doesn't sit with a personality type that shouts from the rooftops or complains a lot.
I think we have a huge amount of empathy. And in my union, I'm on my union on Facebook, there's a lot of people who, when the question of pay comes up, they say, oh, well, everyone else, there are people out of a job. Some people don't get paid as much. And we're so busy worrying about other people that we don't worry about ourselves.
Yes.
And then all these experiences build up, all this trauma builds up, there's stress.
And you reach a break, of course.
And then you break.
So when will you, forgive me, but when do you have to decide if you're going to go back or not?
I'm going back in. I'll be going back in February next year, and it will. I'd love to remain a nurse, but I might not remain on the front line.
Right.
Unfortunately, you get paid more when you step up and go into management, or you step back and go into something that's not clinical. And I love my job, but I need to.
Yeah, you've got other priorities now. We can work out what they are, given that you gave birth a month early, not long ago. What is the job actually like on the ground then? So outside issues aside, like pay and I mean, is it harder than it was when you started?
Yeah, definitely. Why? We've lost a lot of experienced staff. So although we do have staff on the ground, they're newly qualified, so they don't have the same skill set. And a lot of people are choosing to die at home rather than go into hospital. A lot of hospices still aren't accepting visitors, so people are deciding to stay at home, which makes it far more complex because these are conditions we wouldn't normally manage in the community. Doctors aren't visiting patients at home for good reason in some cases, which means that then gets picked up by us. And it's just so much more death than it used to be. We've lost so many of our long-term patients to COVID, to things that possibly could have been picked up earlier. But if we'd have sent them into hospital, it was basically sending them in to die. It's just really hard. And then, although some people are lovely, I do get abuse shouted at me on the streets. I get people that question whether COVID...
you mean vaccine weirdos? COVID weirdos.
Yeah, and I think some people are just frustrated at everything, and I'm a person in a uniform.
Still wouldn't take it out on a nurse, though, would you? I mean, what do they shout at you? If you can repeat it on the Great British Radio Show.
I had someone shout a very long spiel of how NHS weren't doing enough for COVID. And
not doing enough, and then you cross the road and someone's shouting at you for doing too much.
Yeah, I had someone shout at me because they felt that I was in their parking space on the street, but it was lots of swearing and we had people shout at us because They feel that we're going in and out of a street too often. We're causing too much traffic when we visit people. There are people stuck at home watching everything.
Yeah, of course there are.
I think everyone's frustrated, and I understand that.
Well, I understand frustration, but ring a radio station, have a fight with a presenter. Don't start shouting at nurses in the street. I mean, for heaven's sake, and you know what I'm going to say. Thank you for all that you do. I'm sorry that you have to ring people like me in order to be heard like that, and obviously... I suppose if you were a cricketer who was in receipt of a relatively mild punishment for some vile public statements that you made 8 years ago, then the Prime Minister would be stepping up to support you today instead of just little old me. 10:32 is the time. Holly Harris is here with the headlines. 10:36 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here it is. This is what I was struggling to articulate to Anne. This is contained within the Select Committee report, Health Select Committee report on burnout among NHS staff. Discretionary effort is the phrase, which you know, but I'll explain for the benefit of the tape. It's doing stuff that you don't have to do. Doing stuff that's not part of your terms and conditions, going above and beyond. So going above and beyond, actually, is a better phrase, isn't it, than discretionary effort, is the rocket fuel that powers the NHS, effectively. Here's the kicker. If staff worked to contract and worked to rule, we simply would not be able to provide anything like the quality of care that we need to. Part of the problem is that we are relying relentlessly on the goodwill of our staff. I hesitate, I may not run too far with the question I'm about to ask you, but if you're in the sector, if you're in the service, can you just give us a rough idea of two things? First, how far above and beyond do you routinely go? I mean, how funny is it to think of what your working day would be like if you did only what you are contractually required to do? All right, 0345 6060973. And the second question, which perhaps is a bit irresponsible, we'll find out, won't we? What would happen if you didn't? I mean, I don't think it is irresponsible because the Select Committee has told us what would happen. We would not be able to provide anything like the quality of care that we need to. But I wonder whether you can translate that into digestible reality. So if you didn't go routinely, daily, above and beyond the call of duty and what you are required to do, what would happen on your ward? What would happen in your surgery? What would happen on your rounds if you didn't do what most of us don't do, and that is essentially do extra work for no money? 0345 6060973. Eileen is in Saint-Savin in France. Eileen, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James.
Hello.
I don't know where to start really now.
Oh.
I've been a nurse all my life, and I moved to France 3 years ago because I did get burnt out. So that was before the pandemic. But everything that is being said is so historic. We've always worked over our hours. We've always been underpaid. We always go the extra mile. I mean, the last caller...
Yes.
Who spoke about her empathy and looking after patients in their own home. I mirrored that. So my job was as a palliative care nurse in the community. And my specific role was looking after people in the last 2 weeks of life. Now, if myself and my team didn't work 4 hours over our contractual hours per se, then patients would die undignified deaths. There's no two ways about it. Absolutely no two ways about it.
And this is, in many ways, an impossible conundrum, isn't it, for people like you or for people still there? Because you can't... I mean, this is why industrial action is always so difficult for healthcare professionals as well, because you could show how valuable you are by demonstrating what would happen if you weren't there, or if you, I mean, in this case, even more powerfully, if you simply weren't doing unpaid extra work every day, then this already damaged service would collapse.
We forfeit our annual leave because we need to help these patients. We forfeit so much. My working day, because I was park management as well in the community. Should have been 9 to 5, and it was Monday to Friday. I used to get up in the morning at 5:30, be in the office for 7, and I'd get home to my partner no earlier than 9 p.m. at night. And
now, well, I can see why. Just define the word burnout for us, if you would.
Total and utter exhaustion. And can I just finish, James, by just saying that, well, two things. One, I moved to France because the tipping point was my brother ended up dying of cancer, and I just said, that's it, we're going. Okay. And within 6 months, we were here.
Gosh.
But now, obviously, I'm in contact with all of my colleagues who are very experienced, highly skilled nurses and doctors. And this government, with regards to the PPE, for example, where they were saying, everyone's got their PPE. My God, no, they didn't have it. My colleagues were going into patients' homes. They had no PPE.
So this is interesting for a number of reasons, but not least because it was you'd already reached breaking point before the pandemic came along, and the pandemic has added epic insult to already extant injury.
James, the majority of my colleagues were at burnout before the pandemic. I can't imagine it now. I really can't.
Well, I'm glad. I don't know what to say. If I say I'm glad you got out, it sounds a bit glib, doesn't it? And a bit unfair on the people still toiling. But you are
a wee bit. But I'm 57 now, so.
And is everything all right status-wise in France? Have you got all your canards in a row?
Absolutely.
Good.
Everything is perfect here, James.
Well, there you go.
It's perfect.
Thank God for freedom of movement. Oh, yeah, 10:42 is the time. Thank you, Eileen. I tease. I normally ignore these because it's just the phraseology, Gene. It's nothing personal. I assume, James, that you will be covering ... and then it's normally quite a weird bit of whataboutery or a very obscure story that follows. But I did actually read the second line of this, so I'm delighted to say, Gene, that I will be indeed covering the opt-out from this personal records story within the NHS. We'll be doing it with one of the GPs that's warning about possible dangers at about 11:30 today, giving the full heads up on that and the relevance of this 21st of June deadline. 03456060973 is the number you need to follow Eileen on the NHS conversation. And really, it's a conversation about burnout and a scary question I hesitate to ask, but I'm asking it. Eileen's given us some indication. What would happen if you all worked to rule? I feel bad now, and Eileen talks about annual leave being cancelled, but luckily I left you in Matt Fry's capable hands last week, so I don't feel too guilty about taking my own holiday. But what would happen if everybody in the NHS woke up tomorrow morning and said, right, I'm just going to do my contracted hours? I've got a feeling that is one of the most terrifying prospects that the country could face. And I am also obviously getting lots of messages suggesting that it's all deliberate as a precursor to privatisation, and I'm afraid the days of me poo-pooing that idea or dismissing it out of hand with this lot in charge are way behind me. Janet's in Ealing. Janet, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Janet.
I just wanted to say that I'm a scientist. I work for the NHS, and I handed my notice in last week, and I'm suffering with burnout. I'm anemic at the moment, and it's all just been a bit too much.
Anemic being not having enough iron in your blood, which is often linked to exhaustion and diet and being on the hoof all the time. Mm-hmm. Oh, dear.
And I've seen quite a few long COVID patients at the moment, so the workload's really increased, and just the underfunding in the hospitals.
Was there a breaking point, or are we just talking about? Was there a straw that broke the camel's back, or are we just talking about a slow?
We had a meeting last week about our workload increasing, and I just realised that I couldn't take any more really. So that was what did it for me.
You sound. I mean, I don't know what you sound like the rest of the time, but you sound a bit shaky still. You're still a bit.
Yeah. I'm on. Yeah, so I'm off on sick at the moment, and just trying to work through it. Really, I probably will go back actually, but
you must put your own health first, mustn't you? I know that's quite an odd thing to say to a NHS scientist, but you have to put your own health first at some point. Otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, otherwise, what happens? And how? I mean, so. Every call we've got so far is pretty much living the reality of what is contained within the report. How widespread is your feeling among your colleagues?
it is quite widespread, really. People can't really cope with the increased workload at the moment.
When we say an increased workload,
well, it's just catching up on the waiting list, really, because during lockdown we just tended to see.
But I mean, in terms of numbers, so there's only 24 hours in a day, and you're already at breaking point, and then they call a meeting to say you're going to have to do another.
Well, just like extra hours. I mean, I work extra hours anyway, which is why you can't work anymore. But weekend work.
Right.
And the general feeling was most people had had enough. And
are you allowed to say no? Are you allowed to say I can't do any more?
Yes, you can. You can, but I don't know. I think the guilt. You feel like you should be helping.
It's your decency. Your decency is what's keeping the NHS afloat at the moment, in the face of what I would call indecent politics. But you don't have to agree with the second bit. Your decency and your colleagues' decency, whether we describe it as, discretionary effort or going above and beyond the call of duty or going the extra mile or empathy, what you are describing is your common decency being the fuel that keeps the NHS moving.
Yeah, probably.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, and I hope you feel better soon. I really do. But don't rush anything. Look after yourself before you can. So it sounds like something off a greetings card. I do apologise. Look after yourself before you can look after others. Pompous arse. My apologies, Jenny. 10:51 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we continue to examine the select committee report on burnout in the NHS, and this really, I think I can say, scary question of what would happen if you didn't do what is described as discretionary effort, if you didn't go beyond the call of duty beyond what is required. We'll return to that shortly, but some breaking news this morning. Rachel Venables joins me to talk you through the latest developments in the Sarah Everard case. Yeah. Rachel.
Well, you'll remember, James, of course, that Sarah Everard went missing in Clapham in South London back in March. The 33-year-old marketing executive had been walking home from a friend's house, and there was a huge national outcry, real horror at her disappearance. There was a huge manhunt as well, and tragically her body was found in Woodland in Kent a week later, and tests subsequently showed that she died after suffering pressure to her neck. Now, her disappearance and death as well, of course, sparked really ferocious and quite painful national discussions and debates as well about women's safety, about male violence against women and girls, and all of this tension was really only heightened when a serving Metropolitan Police officer called PC Wayne Cousins was arrested in connection with her disappearance. He was then subsequently charged with her kidnap and murder, and the 48-year-old from Deal worked in the Met's diplomatic protection team. Now, a provisional plea hearing date had been set for July, a trial for the end of October, but just before 10 o'clock this morning, he pleaded guilty at the Old Bailey to 2 counts of kidnap and rape of Sarah Everard. Now, the court has also heard indications from his legal team that he accepts responsibility for her killing, but he wasn't asked today to enter a plea to the charge of murder. His defence are at the moment waiting for the results of medical reports, which they have commissioned. Now, a further plea hearing is scheduled for the 9th of July, but that is PC Wayne Cousins, 48 years old, pleading guilty today at the Old Bailey to the kidnap and rape of Sarah Everard.
Rachel Venables, thanks very much indeed. More on that story as and when it develops, although we wouldn't expect any further details today, would we?
No, I think July possibly the next big update in this case.
Thank you very much. 10:53 is the time, and back to the NHS report this morning from the Select Committee on Health and Social Care. And do remember that whenever we have these conversations, social care is very much part of the picture. I think we're all sometimes a little bit guilty of focusing on one and to the exclusion of the other. But social care burnout must be just as acute a problem as healthcare burnout. But this picture of staff so stressed by the relentless demands of their jobs and working environments that they end up going on sick leave or leaving altogether. And we've spoken to both, haven't we, on the program? It's weird at the minute. We've actually already spoken to both of those today, 10:54. Someone who left before the pandemic even kicked in due to burnout. Someone who's on sick leave at the moment due to burnout, wondering whether they'll go back. It's kind of scary. And the scariest thing of all for me is the question of what would happen if you weren't good people. if you were clock watchers, as we used to call them in my retail days? What would happen if you were a clock? Clock, I said, Keith. Behave yourself. It wasn't that, are you being served in my retail days? Clock watchers. I'm free. The clock watchers in my days in retail. If the NHS was full of clock watchers, what would happen? I bet you're too scared to tell me. Or you probably don't even know. You can't even contemplate the idea of a service run by people that didn't daily go above and beyond the call of duty. And I have to remind you, I know I sort of flirted with the idea of leaving politics out of it. That was plainly a ridiculous ambition. That in 2010, when David Cameron became Prime Minister, patient satisfaction in the NHS was the highest it had ever been. Now, since records began, to be fair, records actually hadn't been in position for forever. But since they started measuring patient satisfaction, I'm 99% sure it was at the highest it had ever been, even in the midst of the global financial crisis, which was, of course, caused by there being too many libraries in Wolverhampton. Copyright Alexi Sale. 10:55 is the time. Manjit's in Croxley Green. Manjit, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome, mate. Thank you.
I'll just probably illustrate a couple of points that you're talking about, and it just sort of brings a few things to my mind. I think, if the NHS was run on people who were clock watchers, as you call them, and walked out at their shift end time on the dot, the system would end tomorrow. If that happened tomorrow, the system would collapse.
No, you can't clock off if you. I don't know what bit you're in. Which bit of the?
I'll sort of tell you a story to illustrate that. So I'm a specialist in both emergency medicine and intensive care, and I was working in intensive care for the second wave. So I had a shift which was supposed to finish, and I'm not unique, I'm just saying this to illustrate. It's not to big myself.
So you're doing it already. This is what I keep. This is the polar, because I'm built so differently, Manjit. I find this effortless, self-effacing modesty really, really special. But you've done it already. You're already saying, I'm not just me. Don't. So, could you imagine if it was politicians ringing in? They'd all be queuing up to tell us why they're better than the last caller, and actually they are special. But anyway, I digress. Carry on.
Yeah. So at the peak of the pandemic, we were transferring a lot of intubated patients to intensive care, and my shift was due to finish at 8 o'clock, and handover happens at 8, so everyone was quite busy. So I was intubating a patient, putting some lines in, transferring them via CT to the intensive care unit. I got there at about 11 o'clock in the morning, at which point I handed over and was thanked for my hard work, and I left.
So you were supposed to finish at 8, so you've already done 3.
I was supposed to finish at 8, so I've done 3 extra hours. And then I was supposed to be back at 8 the following evening. But because the pressures on the system were so high, I was called up at 5 o'clock to see if I could get in for 6. I got in for just after 6 because there were more patients who needed transferring to the intensive care unit. So, it's something which happens on a daily basis. And if I wasn't there, there would be no one. There would be no one to transfer that patient.
So people would be dying in corridors.
Care. Yes, it would happen because there's no one to fill those gaps.
Shocked but not surprised, probably, is the closest I can come to describing the reaction of people listening to you. Can we draw, and don't feel compelled to do so if you don't fancy it, because that's specific to the pandemic. Obviously, it was a unique experience. Yeah. Please God, it was a unique experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
How relevant is that description to normal service when and if it is resumed?
So pre-pandemic, myself and my colleagues, again, were working above and beyond. And what I'll say is, the way medical training works is you finish medical school, then there's 2 what we call foundation years. So you get your full registration. After that, you go into specialty training. So if you want to be, some sort of medical cardiologist, you go into a route of training. What more than 50% of the workforce is doing after those 2 foundation years is they're taking a gap in training, meaning they're not applying for training posts because they're already, within 2 years, they're already so burnt out by the workload that they feel they need a career break.
You don't need to answer this question either, but we've done a lot on the programme recently. You've been too busy saving lives to have heard most of it, which I think is an acceptable excuse in the circumstances. But we find ourselves often wondering whether we're looking at just a combination of incompetence or cock-up versus a sort of sinister master plan. So the sinister master plan is the Chomsky-esque description of privatisation being preceded by the deliberate running down of morale and service in a public sector organisation. And then the sort of cock-up stroke incompetence one would be closest to them thinking, we'll be all right because people like Manjit are always going to do unpaid extra hours, so we'll never actually reach breaking point. Do you have a view on that, whether or not what is happening now is deliberate or something sadder?
It's above my qualification to say.
Yeah, it's above mine as well.
I think that there are clear signs that there's more involvement of the private healthcare industry in places like GP with private GP services. Now it's very fashionable at the moment, I think, to have a pop at GPs, both within and outside the medical profession. And I'd probably like to defend them a little bit. My wife is a general practitioner who just this week has quit her GP salaried job because of burnout.
Oh, no.
And I think if you ask any general practitioner what they would want to give their patients, it's more than what they're allowed to give their patients. The pandemic has moved us forwards. The NHS has moved the NHS forwards probably 10 times technologically where we would be.
Okay.
We've moved to e-consults, which I think we needed to do anyway.
So this is a silver lining of sorts that you describe.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to hear.
But it's a double-edged sword. So. Yes. Whereas there used to be a cost to getting to your GP. And what I mean by cost is a cost personally. If I want to see my GP, I have to take maybe the morning off work, or I have to call the surgery at 8 o'clock in the morning and schedule an appointment. What I do now is if I want to see my GP, I can fill out an e-consult at midnight the night before. I'll get a phone call from a GP the next day to address my problem.
Okay.
Which takes that sort of opportunity cost. I can do that, and I can have that conversation when I'm at work. So it takes that barrier away, which means that anyone who wants to access general GP services can do so much more easily, which is great. But if you haven't got the volume of GPs to sort through that, then it's just not tenable. So now GPs are having to do full consultations in about 5 to 7 minutes, which is, not what patients deserve, and it's not what GPs want to do.
No, I see. What's your wife going to do instead, if you don't mind me asking? Is she just going to put her feet up for a while?
Well, she will still do general practice work, but just not with the same sort of salaried commitments, not the same admin commitment. So she can be a little bit more flexible.
No, I can see why. I mean, crikey, every caller today has made it pretty crystal clear as to why anybody might make that decision in that situation. Manjit, I hate it. Sounds pathetic. Sounds like a sort of glib throwaway line, but I do mean it, and I hope you know that I mean it, and I speak on behalf of hundreds of thousands of other people listening. Thank you. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. I think that's a slightly pompous word for a gob on a stick to use, but I think we do have a duty of sorts to take a few more calls on the NHS question, but you know by now that we will return to these issues, and that we often have a special lane for public sector workers. If we are, for example, discussing stories about the NHS, then weirdly I'm more interested in speaking to people who work for the NHS than I am in the fella who got in touch to say, God, listening to this, James, doesn't it make you hate all those teachers who are complaining about having to work an extra half an hour a day? And I'm going to sound like a teenager now, briefly, and I'm like, no. No, hearing how hard it is to be an NHS professional does not make me hate teachers, mate. I don't know what newspapers you read, but my God, somebody there deserves a bonus. They really do. But no, teachers also incredibly hardworking and incredibly maligned. In fact, I'll give you a little hint as to how the right-wing media works. If you hear somebody complaining about white working-class boys being left behind in schools, just press fast forward, and very, very soon you will hear the same people encouraging the parents of white working-class boys who've been left behind in schools to attack teachers. Why are these kids not doing better at school? I don't know. Could it have anything to do with the fact that the columnists and commentators who complain about them not doing well in school are the same columnists and commentators who encourage their parents to hate teachers? No, couldn't be linked at all, James. No, not in a million years. So, no, Dominic, I think your name is. Just grow up, mate. 7 after 11 is the time. So we'll talk to Eamon, who's in Derry, and then perhaps perhaps move on to this second lockdown, which, I wang on about the right-wing media. I think, and you'll probably come up with a better example or you'll be able to disprove me, but I think that this is the first time in my life, my career at least, since I started doing this for a living, that the right-wing rhetoric of the sort of Murdoch-sponsored media and all of the plutocrat-owned newspapers has failed to move the needle of public opinion. It's really strange. I think I know why. And I shall drop that bombshell later this hour, but I can't remember a time where... if you just look at immigration at the moment, I know some people are trying to get you very, very cross and scared about desperate humans crossing the English Channel in dinghies, and they probably succeeded already in some cases. That's just the way the cookie crumbles, I suppose. But if you look at how much the public cares about immigration and link it to how much the media is telling them to care about immigration, it's breathtaking how the graph goes up and down exactly according to which buttons are being pressed in the media. But I don't think it's worked on lockdown. And I think that's fascinating. I think despite the privations and the problems, and there are, nothing is universal. I can't possibly describe everybody. But I'm talking about the polling, with all of the caveats that talking about polling includes. I am talking about the very odd fact for me that all of these people insisting that... I think one Daily Mail columnist who writes his column from his Florida holiday home is complaining about people working from home again today. I need to double-check. I only picked that up from Twitter. But that's kind of perfect example of what I'm describing. All of these people who are normally telling you to get cross about X, Y and Z, you're not getting cross about Z, Y or X. With obviously some exceptions, the polling suggests that public support for better safe than sorry is still in place, has been sustained throughout, which makes those initial decisions that were based upon a belief that we'd suffer from lockdown fatigue all the more worrying and scary. 9 minutes after 11. On the question of burnout in the NHS, Eamon is in Derry. Eamon, what can you tell us?
Hello, thanks for having me on. Well, basically I work in the ward in my local hospital. I just do clerical work, but I'm working alongside with the nurses every day. And just seeing the stress that they go under, it's unbelievable. But at the same time, I would like to kind of just express the magnificence of their grace under pressure and how they handle it and stuff. But at the same time, you have nurses who are there and they're like, I don't want to go home because I want to make sure that everything's okay and everybody's okay on the ward, the patients and such like that.
I find it really hard to navigate this, and you may as well. I don't know, but it's a personality type that we're talking about. It's an attribute, isn't it? It's a quality of character that is keeping those nurses at work. It's not. It's certainly not the pay. It's not any recognisable reward in material or financial terms. It's certainly not. So in a way, the more decent. I'm just going to think whether or not I want to say this out loud, Eamon. Bear with me a minute. You know what it's like these days with offence archaeology and people digging through. Yeah, I think the more decent NHS staff are, the more indecent governments can behave.
I would probably have to agree with you on that. Simply because, you have Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock, donning the NHS badge when you just know that. I think you just know deep down, it's like a feeling you get, gut feeling that they don't care at all. They're giving nurses, people I work with, a piddly 1% or 2% raise in their wage, and these people are working literally their fingers to the bone, it's just unbelievable, and then they take all the credit.
So the calculation, I don't know whether they care or not. I can't read their minds. I spent most of last year much of this year sticking up for Matt Hancock and claiming that he was the only one in the cabinet who had a conscience. I feel increasingly ridiculous about that, but not quite ridiculous enough to abandon it yet. I'll just note that it's hardly a compliment to describe you as being the least sociopathic member of the current cabinet. But I wonder if it's a vote thing. I wonder why there aren't more votes in looking after people like you and your colleagues. I just wonder why.
I don't understand it. Like I say with these nurses, they're almost too afraid to go home because they just want to make sure they're their patients are okay.
I know.
Like, you know,
but there's something inside us as punters. There's something inside us that gets poked by the invitation to come and clap on our doorsteps. You know, that's not normal behaviour at the best of times, and yet there's something there that speaks of a concern. It speaks of a care or whatever you want to call it. So we can find that button to press to make the British public really care about healthcare professionals in the context of clapping on our doorsteps, but not in the context of a ballot box or more political agitation. It's just bizarre. I mean, it's not new, is it? But it's baffling.
Well, I mean, you're explaining that there's these people complaining about nurses or doctors that say that they have to work longer hours or they're overworked and stuff, but these people that are complaining are one day going to rely on these people to look after them. So, I mean, it's...
Well, that was a key moment, actually, in my political development was realising not long after leaving Fleet Street that people I used to sit alongside with and were friends of mine led the attack on firefighters when they wanted to take industrial action. If you'd said to me as a young man that the British media routinely attacks firefighters, teachers, doctors, nurses, police officers, prison officers, parole officers, immigration, I mean, you name it, I hadn't noticed, and I used to work for a tabloid newspaper, so it happens without us noticing, and that's the scariest thing of all. Finally, Eamon, if everybody just did, I don't know what it's like in your department, but if everybody in your daily experience just said, right, I'm getting up in the morning, I'm not doing more, I might do 10 minutes just at the end of my shift to hand over to the next person, but I'm not doing any extra, what would happen in your hospital?
To be honest, that's something I can't imagine ever happening. Like, I mean, I couldn't even, I couldn't even picture it. Like, it's hard to imagine because nobody would do that.
No, and that is genuinely incredible, I think. Genuinely incredible. 14, just coming up to 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think we may take a couple more calls on this because at past we're catching up on this data collection story that has got many people quite worried. And there is a very real sense that it is perhaps being smuggled in without us paying proper attention to it. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong from where I'm sitting at the moment, but it does mean that we should probably be paying proper attention to it. So do you want to have a crack at this? A genuine, I mean, I don't know whether or not it veers into the morbid, but if you woke up tomorrow as an NHS professional and you and all of your colleagues said, sorry, I'm just working to rule. It's a very, very good point that I used the word clock watcher as a pejorative. That's part of the problem, actually. You're right. I've lost the text that said that, but you're absolutely right. That's evidence of me being gaslit from my retail days. What's wrong with being a clock watcher? I'm only getting paid for the hours that I'm paid for. Why would I stick around for an extra hour to tidy up the shoe stock room? And yet somewhere inside, something happened to me when I worked in shops and I got gaslit into thinking that clock watchers were the problem, rather than bosses who expected me to work extra hours for no money. Isn't that incredible? So clock watcher is an insult. Why is clock watcher an insult? In the public sector, I can see a case for at least making it not a badge of honour. But in the private sector, he's a clock watcher. How much did the shareholders get for doing NAFL last year? Yeah, 8 million quid. Yeah, he's a clock watcher there, that bloke there on 8 quid an hour. Weird, yeah? Anyway, if everybody woke up tomorrow morning and said, we're not going to do what the Select Committee reports as a discretionary effort, what the rest of us would call the extra mile, above and beyond, unpaid overtime, what would happen to the NHS if in your department, right now, you all decided that tomorrow morning, that's it. You're just going to work the hours you're contracted and paid to work. And you can paint whatever picture you please, as long as you are, in your own mind, telling me the truth. 90 minutes after 11 is the time. Some breaking news for you, but you may have noticed half the internet's gone down. Now, I've checked. This isn't just me pressing the wrong button. So if technological issues poke their ugly heads above the parapet during the course of this programme, the first thing I do is check with Keith that I haven't done something wrong. And on this occasion, I am supremely confident that I have not done anything wrong. And even if I had done anything wrong, I'm not sure there's a button in this studio or this building that, if pressed in error, would see The Guardian, Le Monde, The Times, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, other gov.uk sites, the Financial Times have all gone down. So the second thing we do is check with Will Guyatt, LBC's technology correspondent, about whether or not this is as big a deal as it appears to be. And here he is. Will Guyatt, LBC's technology correspondent. Is this as big a deal as it currently appears to me to be?
It is right now, James. And for those watching this visually, I'm currently in a cupboard, literally, so excuse the background. But yes, the internet has essentially gone wrong. And what you have to speed up the distribution of websites these days, you have these things called content delivery networks.
CDNs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we want pages to load as quickly as we can. That's the most important thing. We've all become really impatient. And what's happened this morning is one of the major CDNs called Fastly has started reporting problems about 20 or so minutes ago. Oh. Initially, people thought it was Amazon Web Services. Now, the thing people might not be aware of Amazon, they've got a huge business outside of the retail arm these days, which is supplying web services for people. This is when people talk about the cloud, the idea of all this kind of internet infrastructure going on virtually. So something's gone fairly wrong this morning. I'm not standing here and suggesting it's a hack yet. I think something's been unplugged. Quite as simple as that. Something has gone wrong and it's been a malfunction.
But not bad actors, as it were. And obviously, I'm not talking about the fellow who set up a political party. I'm talking about bad agents, bad people, hackers, Russians.
Yeah, we're not talking North Korea or Iran yet, and definitely not Roger Moore. So, from
how
those
dare you? Flipping heck, Will. Cool. Caught in controversy. And could you put? I mean, might we reasonably expect normal service to be resumed, or is that a silly question?
They've been posting updates every couple of minutes to say they're still looking into the problem at the moment. So it would appear to me if you're still looking into it, you don't know what's caused it. So we're waiting for this to be fixed. But what it does go to show us is we've all become so used to the internet being super fast and everybody wants everything sped up. And this is an example of the internet itself not going down, but one of the services that you now need to speed up the internet going wrong. And it's screwed up loads of people's mornings. I have just checked, lbc.co.uk is still available, so you can still go there for your news.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. Why would that be? Because we use a different CDN.
Yeah, we do not use that CDN. Exactly, you're being good at this.
Yeah. It's only thanks to you, mate. I'm like Grasshopper, and you're my sensei. Will Guy, LBC's technology correspondent. Anything else to add, do you think, or not?
No worries.
It's all good. Thank you. 23 minutes after 11. Will Guy, live from a cupboard. All the breaking news on LBC. More on that as and when it happens. So it's. Well, you heard what the man said. Amazon's down as well. Loads of massive websites down. But we think more likely through error than more likely to be cock-up than conspiracy, to coin one of our favourite phrases on this programme. And we will obviously keep a close eye on it, but it's hardly breaking news, is it? You don't need me. You can just go and turn your laptop. we went without Wi-Fi for a few days during last week on holiday, and it is quite funny because you think as a middle-aged bore that the children, they don't know they're born these days. The kids, they were all right with it. One of mine got the Lego out and rediscovered the joys of Lego. It was me and Mrs. O'Brien that were, crikey, we might have to cook a meal. We can't get delivery. This is just outrageous. Then we realised that the 3G on our phones, the 5G on our phones was still working. So disaster was averted. 24 minutes after 11. Speaking of disasters, it's a genuine question, although it's a bit tabloidy, isn't it, for our tastes? But I think every now and then you need to reach for the sledgehammers rather than the scalpels. Quite a pun, that, in the context of the conversation that we're having. But what would happen if everybody in the NHS decided to do what the massive majority of the UK workforce does and work only the hours that they were paid to work? Jonathan's in Nottingham. Jonathan, what do you think?
I think it would just collapse.
How quickly?
Within a day.
Blimey.
Where I work at the moment, I currently work in a theatre area, which is now trying to catch up with all the cases that were left behind because of COVID. And that's based on the goodwill of people, offering to do extra shifts or overtime.
You get paid for an extra shift, and you get paid for a lot of overtime. I want to make light of your efforts or sacrifices, but how much of it would be unpaid, do you think, in context?
I would say about 40% of it. People are always staying on late afterwards.
Let me ask you a different question. How normal would it be to clock off on time at the moment, or at any point in the last 18 months?
It's never been normal. No. It's never been normal. I've been nursing for 30 years. It's been the thing to do, whether that's good or bad. It's just always how it's been. It's just the lack of lack of strength in the system to make up for people.
What happens then next? Because we're struggling to recruit. Obviously, the plan to, quote, train our own, end quotes, is yet to come to fruition. Yeah. So there's all sorts of shortages at all sorts of levels right across the NHS. People can scare us or warn us about privatisation, but that isn't going to conjure staff from the ether. No, it's just going to mean that whatever staff are working in that corner see a little bit of their wages skimmed off by shareholders and board members. So what happens next then, Jonathan? Because I don't want to scare my listeners, but sometimes you need to look into.
For instance, where I work at the moment, we have lots of Filipino nurses, lots of Spanish nurses, all fill in the gaps because there aren't the British nurses around to do it. And the fact is that.
To be fair, I've heard Farage is retraining as both a fisherman, a nurse, and a long-distance lorry driver. So that will plug some of the holes in the workforce. Also a waiter as well.
A waiter, brilliant. Thank you.
That's all what we need.
I was going to mention my experience of the first two waves of the pandemic as well, if that's okay.
Of course it is.
Yes. Okay, so in the first wave, I've got 30 years experience as a nurse. I've done ITU in the past, so I volunteered to go to ITU for the first wave, which was, it was hard. It was very, very hard work, but it was nothing probably compared to what the second wave was. That was, months longer. The public had grown tired of us probably by that point, which was understandable. Everybody was sick of lockdown. And the state was in the hospital I work in the second wave, as they were pulling in people like dietitians, pharmacy assistants, anybody that could help out in ITU, literally as a pair of hands, were there. And you had a ITU nurse, an ITU nurse with one patient trying to manage these other unsupervised, sort of unqualified members of staff with other patients. It was scary.
There's lots of things I haven't understood about the last 18 months, but this argument that people with other illnesses and conditions were somehow being deliberately ignored or there was a choice in them being put further down waiting lists. Well, I that's the bit I don't get. I can't understand how anybody can end up thinking, because all of those nurses are so busy saving lives of people in ITU, it's a political decision to let chemotherapy appointments go to the wall or to let people with other conditions suffer. I mean, maybe we can't process news unless it involves a sign.
There's only so much capacity in the system.
Well, obviously, mate. Obviously.
Staff. What can you do?
I know. It seems obvious to me, and I speak to people like you, and it becomes even more obvious. But then, you open up a newspaper columnist, and they're banging on about how lockdown was a terrible mistake because of all the people who've had their operations postponed. But their operations were postponed because the hospitals were...
under 100-year pandemic. That's the situation. I mean, my dad died in February from COVID myself, so I know how other people feel. No, it's just one of thousands. He's on the wall in London at the moment. So
is he?
On the COVID, on the memorial wall. Yeah, it's great. Someone from Facebook who didn't even know me put it on there as kindness of strangers, which I think is something that Boris could probably look at.
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah.
Just saw your story on Facebook and took the opportunity to put a memorial to your dad up on the wall.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah.
Well, that's what you need to hear at the moment, isn't it? Decent people.
There's people, exactly, yeah. So it's been a hard...
and here we are. We're back with that question once again. How come I can persuade people to get out onto their doorsteps and give you a clap, but they'll stick their fingers in their ears when you start describing your lived reality, your daily experience?
If people want the health service they deserve, I have to pay for it. That's all you can say. There's nothing else. It needs more investment.
Yes, of course, and you mean through taxes.
I mean, it's either that or it goes private.
It does increasingly seem to be the choice, doesn't it? 11:30. Jonathan, I'm so sorry for your loss. I really am, and indeed for your experience. Brendan makes a really, really interesting point. He says, I'm wondering whether the clapping on the doorstep is intended to say more about the person doing the clapping than the people they are clapping for. I'm not going to comment on that. I'm just going to leave that to stew with you while we head to the headlines with Holly Harris.